First of all, if you're all like me, then I know that you're just as excited for August 11th when the last voyage of the Demeter finally crashes into theaters from Universal Studios. I was fortunate enough to have chatted with the director, Andre Ovredal, who also did Mama, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, to name just a couple. In fact, I actually used that conversation to write my very first feature article for Rumor magazine, this one up here, which you can now snag digitally or on newsstands everywhere. In addition, I also got the privilege of chatting with screenwriter Bragi Schut, as well as Javier Botet, who of course plays Dracula in the film, and also lent his amazing abilities to other great films such as Mama, Slender Man, Wreck, etc. Chatting with these three creators has me even more stoked for the film's release. And as much I love to tell you about the film itself, I haven't seen a screener yet, because only those involved in making the film have seen a private screening so far, because Universal has, understandably, kept their Demeter cards roll tight to their chest, which means that I've only seen the trailers, same as everybody else. However, I was able to get hooked up with an early screener, which I will be watching as soon as possible. So you can look for my initial reaction when I give that a post later on this week. But first, I gotta kill the elephant in the room, guys, because, well, soon after the first trailer came out, I read several grumblings from the usual suspects about how the filmmakers weren't true to Bram Stoker's novel Dracula. They griped about how in the book there were no children aboard the Demeter ship, there were no women on there, and there was no dog other than the large black dog, which of course leapt from the ship when it crashed against the shores of Whitby. Of course, only a few moments into the trailer, and what do we see? We see a woman, we see a dog, we see a child as part of the cast aboard the doomed vessel. And it also showed Dracula in a uniquely monstrous bat-like form throughout the duration of the trailer, which of course brought in grumblings that in the book, particularly in the chapter 7, during the captain's log portion for which this film is based on, that Dracula is seen as a tall, pale man with a thin white mustache. Bullcrap, the self-proclaimed critics shouted from their soapboxes. This isn't how Dracula was in the book. I'll never watch this awful film. Some of them even claimed that Dracula looked too alien-like to be a true representation of Dracula as he was written 126 years ago by, of course, Bram Stoker. Now, when you consider that the 1977 BBC televised version of Dracula that starred Lewis Jordan was widely considered the most faithful adaptation of Dracula, I can only imagine that these same critics were probably been so sour for so long, they don't even remember why anymore. See, Dracula, like all vampires, is at its base root a creature of fantasy. So if you ask me, that automatically qualifies it for reinterpretation as any creator's imagination deems fit. After all, if Dracula wasn't an entity made so fascinating, so captivating by Bram Stoker, that it became the most adapted horror icon in cinematic history, we wouldn't even be discussing the most important book of Bram Stoker's life over a century later. And another thing that so many people seem incapable of considering before ripping on really any book to film adaptation is this: the book will always be the book. The movie will always be the movie. It's damn near impossible to create a movie which perfectly captures everything from the book, and even a 2-hour plus film. I mean, good news for the critics though, because along for the rest of us, is that you can always read the book for that perfect representation of Dracula as Bram intended it. And thanks to Bram's great-grandnephew Dacre Stoker and his colleague Robert 18 Pisan, we can now read it, the book that is, along with its original ending, plus the 101 pages which were previously omitted at the demands of Bram's original publisher. Speaking of Dacre, whom I've had the honor of having multiple chats with, you can find those chats in my Dracula Files playlist, by the way. Dacre's also confident that Bram would be pleased to see his creation evolve into so many different interpretations for better or worse, including with the last voyage of the Demeter. So if Bram's cool with Dracula personifying the different perspective of filmmakers, it's good enough for me. So suck it, critics. Before I start to come across just as embittered of all those armchair critics, let's talk about what the filmmakers did right for the last film, Voyage of the Demeter, which is plenty. One glaring common thread between the director Andre Ovredal and screenwriter Bragi Schut is how much weight they put on getting their film as historically accurate as possible. One of the reasons the script floated around for about 20 years was because to make a film of this magnitude while keeping it as realistic as possible, they had to find an impassioned producer who was willing to spend the cash needed to ensure the film was going to get all the support and resources to make it right. Bragi actually, he told me that he was so invested in getting all the details dialed in that he even bought a blueprint of the Dmitri, which was the Russian schooner that Bram Stoker based his Demeter ship off of. During the setup and the filming process, the director Andre, he would send over images of the set to Bragi, and together with everybody else involved, they made sure that the ship was built under strict guidelines, right down to obviously the costumes that people wore, all the way down to the type of wood that was used to construct the ship. Evidently, their diligence paid off because Javier Botet, the man behind Her Favorite Creature of the Night, told me personally that he was legitimately scared on set, filming in Malta as the ship rocked back and forth during a mock storm as he looked out into the very real sea at night, despite being surrounded by the crew, and he was terrified. And speaking of the crew, not the ones behind the scenes, but the ones getting picked off like the delicious snacks that they were, the fact that a woman, child, and dog are shown in the trailer seemed to really eat at the tender sensitivities of, so many people who must feel they've got a stake in Dracula's legacy. I mean, maybe I can kind of understand the reaction somewhat, despite the malice. I mean, anyone who's read the novel knows there aren't any women and children on board the ship, and the only dog to be seen was hardly anybody's pet. But that said, I think it's also important to take a moment to contemplate why they're there. According to Overdal, he felt that having the boy and his dog and the woman added additional humanity and a certain complexity to the film which couldn't have been executed without them. And let's face it, Dracula only appears in about 30% of the novel, if that, which is to say that Stoker had plenty of time to make us care about his band of heroes and to realize that the heart of his gothic tale isn't some bloodthirsty creature of the night, it's the people at its core. Look at it this way, I mean, Bram Stoker had 27 chapters to stretch out our empathy and compassion for his characters, whereas the film, based solely on the captain's log portion of the novel from chapter 7, only had that one chapter to make us care about characters who are about to experience the worst boat ride of their lives. Let me repeat, the book is the book, the movie is the movie. Two very distinct and very separate mediums for telling a story, each with their own set of freedoms and their own set of restrictions. Even the best book to film adaptation is not going to be a perfect adaptation, nor should it be. It's okay for one to point the other as two separate experiences to be enjoyed on their own separate merits. But in my humble opinion, after speaking with a few of the talented creators responsible for making or sinking this particular ship from hell, depending on how you look at it, I can share with you that it's my firm belief that they did everything possible to make sure that this one was made as authentically as they could possibly make it. And hey, if that means that they had to add a few aspects that weren't in the book to create the same level of caring for the lives that we're following, just as Stoker made us care for them in his book, that I'm good with that. And if they chose to use what's perhaps the most pivotal portion of the novel, the captain's log, to lean in close, real close, into the true primordial beast of Dracula in an effort to make what they all believed is the scariest depiction of the Count yet, then I am very good with that. And something tells me you guys all will be too. And for those who dare, I will see you all aboard the Demeter August 11th. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Please do like and subscribe so that way you can be sure to watch my initial reaction to an early screamer of the film later this week. And until then, stay hungry, stay dark, and I'll see you aboard the Demeter.